Millionaire finds out pregnant wife is cheating, drives off in anger and ends up in a tragic accident. High above the shimmering lights of New York City, Jonathan Redwood believed he had it all. Towering business success, philanthropic accolades, and a mansion that boasted every imaginable luxury. In just a few months, his radiant wife, Clara, would give birth to their long-awaited child, a moment he was convinced would crown his perfect life. Yet in the hush of a late autumn evening, a single phone call threatened to unravel everything. A haunting whisper of suspicion swirled through the corridors of that mansion, setting off a chain of events so catastrophic that even Jonathan's immense fortune couldn't stop its tragic trajectory. Jonathan Redwood's life from the outside looked like the pure embodiment of the American dream. Born in a modest suburb of Cincinnati, he had catapulted himself from an underfunded scholarship student to a Forbes-touted billionaire by the age of 32. His first success was Redwood Innovations, a technology conglomerate that specialized in sustainable energy solutions. In public, he was hailed as a visionary. Magazines put him on their covers, praising not just his business acumen, but his philanthropic works. Scholarships for disadvantaged students, art programs for low-income youth, and generous contributions to environmental conservation. He was, by all accounts, a man who seemed to have no ceiling. Clara Redwood nee Morgan, on the other hand, was the socialite daughter of a well-to-do family from London. She possessed a natural grace and poise that charmed everyone around her, from high society galas in Europe to star-studded charity dinners in New York. Their whirlwind romance had begun at a fundraising gala for pediatric cancer research, an event that Jonathan personally financed. Clara was introduced to him by a mutual friend, Kevin Walters, a family lawyer who advised both the Redwoods and Clara's father, Martin Morgan, on various financial matters. The moment Clara and Jonathan locked eyes, it was as if the entire world paused, giving them a chance to study each other's expressions and realize they had discovered something extraordinary. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony at a Tuscan villa, with paparazzi stationed outside the gates for days, hoping to capture that perfect photo of the new power couple. The wedding was an unforgettable affair. Champagne towers, string quartets, and an exchange of vows under a canopy of wisteria. Society columns described the event as the union of hearts and fortunes, gilded by the pure radiance of two seemingly faultless individuals. Their love story never hinted at storms on the horizon. Yet, as time revealed, illusions of perfection often conceal cracks that can split wide open with the slightest pressure. Jonathan was ambitious, driven, and relentless in his pursuit of business success. Clara, for all her elegance and kindness, had grown up longing for emotional warmth she rarely received from her distant parents. Over time, Jonathan's work demands stretched into nights, weekends, and even holidays. The Redwood estate brimmed with luxury, but between the glittering chandeliers and marble floors, a sense of isolation took root. To the outside world, everything still looked splendid. They threw galas at their Manhattan penthouse, inviting government officials, Hollywood icons, and titans of industry. Photographers snapped images of Clara's perfect smile, immortalizing a couple who seemed to defy any notion of discontent. While the cameras flashed, though, there was a tension in Clara's eyes, a small tremor in her voice during interviews, and a fleeting sense of unease whenever she was asked about her marriage. Nobody noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to. Behind the gilded front doors of Redwood Mansion, shadows danced, subtle arguments about missed dinners, about Jonathan's increasingly erratic travel schedule, and about Clara's inability to speak openly with her husband. The cracks, though faint, were there. Neither of them yet understood just how devastatingly those cracks would tear them apart. After 3 years of marriage, whispers about starting a family grew louder. Interviews with Jonathan often focused on his future legacy. Would he finally slow down and settle into fatherhood? Clara's friends giggled at brunch, sharing their experiences of pregnancy and raising children, all the while nudging her toward what they believed to be her true calling. Gossip magazines fueled curiosity about when this glamorous couple would announce baby news. For the longest time, Clara and Jonathan had no news to share. Though they felt the social pressure, they kept silent about their private struggles. Clara, unbeknownst to the public, had undergone fertility treatments for nearly a year. She worried that perhaps her body might not cooperate, that the dream of raising a child with Jonathan might remain unfulfilled. While Jonathan was supportive in principle, his schedule made it difficult for him to attend medical appointments, often leaving Clara to shoulder the emotional burden on her own. When the day came that Clara's test turned positive, it felt like a gift straight from heaven. She stared at the test results in disbelief, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Her doctor, Vanessa Hilliard, a trusted name in women's health, and someone recognized for her work with the Redwood Family Foundation, confirmed the pregnancy with a warm hug. Clara was ecstatic. For the first time in what felt like ages, she had good news that would not only brighten her life, but possibly pull Jonathan closer to her. That evening, as Jonathan returned from a meeting with international investors in Dubai, Clara waited for him in their tastefully decorated living room. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, and the cozy glow of a dozen candles created an atmosphere of warmth and love. She had placed a small pair of baby shoes on the coffee table, next to a framed photo of their wedding day. The moment Jonathan spotted the shoes, his stoic business facade melted away. He knelt beside Clara, heart pounding, tears brimming in his eyes. In that instant, they were not the Redwood tycoons the world knew. They were simply two human beings marveling at the promise of a new life. He held her close, whispered his undying love, and vowed to change his hectic schedule to be there for her every step of the way. And for a while, it seemed like that vow might hold. News of Clara's pregnancy spread like wildfire through their circle. Suddenly, Redwood Mansion was alive with excitement, phone calls from relatives, an influx of congratulatory gifts, and staff members doubling their efforts to ensure Clara's comfort. Jonathan began reorganizing his commitments to attend prenatal checkups, reading parenting books, and discussing future nursery plans. He appeared ready to shift his priority from unstoppable ambition to devoted fatherhood. Yet, under the surface of that blossoming happiness, something else simmered. Tension had been replaced by renewed commitment, but neither truly confronted the neglected corners of their marriage. They used the pregnancy as a plaster for old wounds, ignoring the slow, steady drip of unresolved issues. For a time, the sense of impending danger was kept at bay by baby showers, nursery decor, and the optimism that the child they always wanted would miraculously fix all that was broken. Little did they know, a new source of pain was about to emerge, shattering their fragile peace. Enter Michael Davis, a charismatic investment banker from Boston with a winning smile and a sharp mind. He had recently joined Redwood Innovations as a consultant to evaluate a major European acquisition. Michael's reputation as a keen strategist preceded him. In the corporate world, whispers of his brilliance had reached Jonathan long before his formal introduction. Jonathan admired competence and had been eager to recruit Michael. He flew him out to New York, meeting him in the Redwood Innovations boardroom. The synergy was immediate. Michael was thorough, articulate, and possessed a laser-like focus that reminded Jonathan of his younger self. At the end of their very first meeting, Jonathan offered Michael a lucrative contract, 2 years advising Redwood Innovations on high-stakes acquisitions. Shortly afterward, Jonathan, proud of his new consultant, invited Michael to the Redwood mansion for dinner, along with other top executives. Clara's role that evening was as host, a role she had performed countless times, but there was something about Michael's presence that left an impression. Perhaps it was his easygoing humor, or his genuine interest in philanthropic work. Unlike many of Jonathan's associates who either worshipped or envied the Redwood fortune, Michael spoke candidly about global issues, referencing philanthropic models Clara had studied and admired. When the dinner concluded and the guests trickled away, Michael lingered, continuing a conversation about an environmental project that Clara had spearheaded. Jonathan, fatigued, excused himself to handle some business emails in his study, leaving Michael and Clara to chat. Their discussion ranged from philanthropic strategies to personal stories about their upbringings. Clara discovered that Michael had grown up in a humble household near Worcester, caring for his younger siblings after his mother passed away from cancer. In return, Clara opened up about her own family's emotional distance and her longing to make an impact through charity work. She also shared her excitement about becoming a mother. The sincerity of their talk that night carved a small yet significant space of intimacy between them. Although nothing remotely improper happened, the threads of connection between them were strong enough that, for just a moment, a corner of Clara's heart stirred. She shook away any troubling thoughts, attributing the intensity of the moment to pregnancy hormones. Michael, for his part, went home that night reflecting on the Redwood mansion's grandeur and on the kindness of Clara Redwood, who was quite unlike other high society women he had encountered. As the weeks passed, Michael's work demanded collaboration with Jonathan nearly every day. Frequent trips were planned: Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, to negotiate Redwood Innovations' expansion. Jonathan invited Michael to join him on these travels, enticed by Michael's expertise in analyzing global markets. Meanwhile, Clara, 6 months into her pregnancy, faced the lonely halls of Redwood Mansion once again. Despite Jonathan's initial promise to be present, business inevitably took precedence. Michael noticed. Phone calls from hotel lobbies across the world found their way to Clara, checking in on her well-being under the guise of discussing philanthropic initiatives. If Jonathan was gone, Michael sought to ensure Clara felt supported, albeit from a respectful distance. But lines between friendship and something more are easily blurred when two people connect on multiple levels: intellectual, emotional, spiritual. Late-night texts about charity proposals began morphing into messages about personal dreams and confessions. Even from continents away, a bond was forming. Jonathan was blissfully unaware, focusing all his attention on sealing massive business deals, trusting Michael entirely as both colleague and friend. By the 7th month of her pregnancy, Clara experienced frequent bouts of exhaustion, often coupled with emotional turbulence. She confided in Michael that she felt invisible in her own home. Jonathan's promises had grown hollow. Skype calls offered hurried greetings, overshadowed by pressing business negotiations in whichever part of the world he found himself. In her solitude, Clara craved empathy, and empathy was exactly what Michael provided. During a brief period when Jonathan returned to New York for a press conference, he invited Michael over to the mansion once again. The three of them dined in the opulent dining hall, discussing Redwood Innovations' breakthroughs and the upcoming child. Jonathan seemed jubilant but preoccupied. His phone buzzed almost incessantly, and he stepped away multiple times to take urgent calls. Meanwhile, Michael and Clara exchanged knowing glances. Clara confided that she felt anxious about motherhood. Michael, genuinely concerned, reassured her that any child would be lucky to have such a caring mother. She smiled back, a flicker of warmth crossing her features. After Jonathan left the table yet again, called away by yet another business crisis, the atmosphere changed. Clara excused herself to get some fresh air on the mansion's balcony. Feeling a tug of concern, Michael followed her. Under the clear night sky, Clara's eyes welled up. She whispered about her fears that Jonathan would remain absorbed in his work, even after the baby's arrival. She wondered if she could shoulder parenthood alone. Michael gently placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Their eyes met. In that fraught moment, a surge of magnetic tension pulsed between them, a mutual awareness that had been building for weeks. Though the moment was brief, it lingered, an unspoken agreement that something more than casual friendship existed there. They parted ways soon after, without discussing it directly. But the line they dared not cross had just come into sight. What followed were intense days of internal struggle. Clara felt remorse nibbling at the edges of her conscience. She reminded herself of her marriage vows, her love for Jonathan, and the fact that she was carrying his child. Meanwhile, Michael wrestled with the ethics of the situation. It was not just his professional integrity at stake. He genuinely admired Jonathan, who had offered him an opportunity he never imagined possible. But the pull toward Clara was overpowering, rooted not merely in physical attraction, but in a profound emotional resonance he had never known before. The precarious balance of that triangle was about to tip. The tipping point came one stormy evening in late summer. Jonathan was away on yet another trip, sealing a final agreement with European partners. Michael visited Redwood Mansion to drop off a folder of documents that needed Clara's signature for some philanthropic project she was spearheading under the Redwood Family Foundation. The house was eerily quiet, and the staff had mostly retired for the night. As Clara and Michael went through the paperwork in the library, thunder rumbled overhead. Raindrops pelted the windows. A sudden lightning flash illuminated Clara's face, revealing her fatigue, her loneliness, and the undeniable longing in her eyes. When she confided how terrified she was about giving birth without genuine emotional support, Michael impulsively embraced her. The tension that had been simmering exploded into a vulnerable kiss. In that kiss, Clara felt a wave of guilt, overshadowed by an even more potent wave of relief. Finally, someone truly saw her, heard her. She broke away, tears of conflict streaming down her cheeks. Michael apologized profusely, but neither of them could deny the swirl of feelings. Caught in the storm both inside and out, they surrendered to months of pent-up desire. It was brief, it was impulsive, and it changed everything. Yet even in the heady rush of that moment, the reality was sobering. Clara was pregnant with Jonathan's child. Michael worked for Jonathan, admired him, and owed him professional loyalty. The very next morning, Clara was racked with shame. She avoided Michael's calls for a few days, trying to pretend it was an isolated lapse in judgment. But something had already shifted. A part of her heart now belonged to someone else. Unknown to them, a member of the household staff, Linda Rowe, had spotted Michael leaving Clara's room early that morning. Worried about the implications for the Redwood family, Linda confided in her close friend Patricia Hawthorne, who also worked in the mansion. Patricia, in turn, felt a moral obligation to alert the Redwood family matriarch, Caroline Redwood, Jonathan's mother. Caroline was no stranger to heartbreak, having once been caught in a scandalous affair herself many years ago. But her primary concern was for her son's reputation and the child Clara was carrying. A few days later, Caroline Redwood discreetly confronted Clara, asking if there was any truth to rumors of impropriety. Clara denied any ongoing affair, carefully skirting around the full truth. She recognized that if Caroline pressed Jonathan with this information, the consequences would be catastrophic. Caroline, sensing something was amiss, refrained from going directly to her son. Instead, she advised Clara to end any involvement with Michael immediately, for the sake of the unborn child. For a brief period, Clara tried. She avoided Michael's calls, found excuses not to meet, and busied herself with final preparations for the baby's arrival. Michael took multiple business trips, often alone, leaving Clara behind. They each tried to bury what had happened under layers of rationalization, but the heart has its own momentum. By the time Clara reached her 8th month, clandestine phone conversations resumed. The secret flame flickered on, refusing to be extinguished. The day Jonathan discovered the truth began like any other hectic morning at Redwood Innovations. He was in his private office, scanning through global market reports, anticipating a crucial phone call from Berlin. His assistant, Jackson Wu, stepped in with a folder of urgent documents. On top was an envelope marked confidential, Caroline Redwood. Thinking it might relate to a family property matter, Jonathan opened it. Inside was a note and a set of photographs. The note was brief, typed and unsigned. Your wife has betrayed you with Michael Davis. The baby may not even be yours. The photographs showed Clara and Michael in what appeared to be an intimate embrace at Redwood Mansion's balcony. Even though the pictures were somewhat grainy, there was no mistaking the tender way they held each other. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. He refused to believe it, telling himself the photos might be doctored, but a creeping sense of dread took hold of him. He closed his eyes, recalling the countless times he had left Clara alone, his phone glued to his ear while finalizing multi-million-dollar deals. All the subtle signs of distance in her eyes, the hush in her voice whenever he entered a room while she was on the phone, the coded tension at dinner parties. Suddenly, it all converged into a horrifying picture. One text from Michael discussing foundation matters flitted into his memory, and he realized it might have been more than strictly business. In a rage, Jonathan leapt from his chair, scattering the contents of his desk. Jackson Wu rushed in to see if everything was all right, only to be shooed away by a trembling hand. Jonathan stormed out, ignoring the urgent call from Berlin that lit up his phone. In that raw moment, business was the last thing on his mind. He sped toward Redwood Mansion, scarcely noticing the traffic around him. Anxiety morphed into a cold fury. By the time he reached the gated driveway, he had replayed the images in his head 100 times, each one fueling his anger further. Clara was in the nursery, measuring the crib space for a new set of linens, when Jonathan burst through the door. She barely recognized him in that instant, his face contorted with wrath, his voice cracking as he demanded an explanation. She froze, stammering denials that rang hollow even to her own ears. When confronted with the photographs, tears streamed down her cheeks. She tried to explain it was a one-time mistake, that the child was definitely Jonathan's, and how deeply sorry she was. But her words merely bounced off his seething rage. Jonathan could hardly breathe. His world, carefully crafted and meticulously maintained, was collapsing like a poorly built house of cards. The betrayal was bad enough. The possibility that the child he had so fervently anticipated might not be his was a blow he couldn't bear. In a moment of desperation, Clara grabbed his arm, insisting they could fix everything. He shook her off, roared about the injustice of having poured his life into someone who could be so disloyal, and stormed out. Unable to think rationally, Jonathan snatched the keys to his sleek Aston Martin DB11, the prized possession he rarely drove, unless he needed a mental escape. Clara tried to follow him out onto the porch, begging him to stop, frightened that he was in no state to drive. But he paid no heed to her pleas. As thunderclouds gathered in the sky, an echo of the night he had been betrayed, Jonathan peeled down the estate's long driveway. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. The city streets, usually a symbol of his success, now felt claustrophobic. He sped wildly, ignoring traffic lights, nearly clipping a cyclist, honking at anyone who dared to move too slowly. Horns blared in protest, but he was deaf to the chaos. All he heard was the pounding in his own head, every beat chanting, "Betrayal, betrayal, betrayal." In his fury, he didn't notice the ominous skies opening up, drenching the roads in a slick layer of rain. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the passenger seat, calls from Clara, from his mother, From Jackson, from Kevin Walters. Anyone who sensed something was amiss tried to reach him, but he paid the phone no attention. Within minutes, he hit a stretch of highway on the outskirts of the city, where traffic was thinner. The rain was relentless now, lightning illuminating the surroundings in ghostly flashes. Jonathan's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. Memories swarmed him, their wedding day in Tuscany, Clara's laughter at the baby shower, the first ultrasound image of the unborn child. Now these memories were tainted by images of Michael's arms around her. Then, in a fraction of a second, everything changed. A truck ahead of him lost control on a sharp bend, skidding across the lanes. Jonathan slammed on the brakes, but the water-slicked pavement offered no grip. His Aston Martin fishtailed violently. He jerked the wheel, but the inertia was too great. The last sound he registered was the screech of metal and the shattering of glass as his car collided with the guardrail and then with the oncoming truck. In that split second before impact, Jonathan thought of Clara, not with bitterness, but with a final, agonizing heartbreak. And then darkness swallowed him. News of the accident swept across social media faster than even Redwood Innovations could intervene. Helicopter footage showed the wreckage of the once luxurious Aston Martin, now a twisted mass of metal. Emergency medical teams arrived on the scene, carefully extracting Jonathan from the wreck. Unconscious and severely injured, he was rushed to a nearby hospital, where a team of surgeons worked feverishly to save his life. Clara received the call from Kevin Walters. Her screams echoed through the mansion, prompting the staff to gather, tears in their eyes. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her pregnant belly heaving with sobs as she realized the final words Jonathan had heard from her were pleas. He had brushed aside. With every fiber of her being, she prayed for a chance to make amends, to explain everything truthfully. Guilt gnawed at her, intensified by the knowledge that she had pushed Jonathan to this reckless drive. Michael Davis, upon hearing of Jonathan's condition, was racked with remorse. Despite the knowledge that his presence might not be welcomed, he rushed to the hospital. There he found Clara, half delirious with worry. The Redwood family, particularly Caroline, glared at Michael as if he were the devil incarnate. Meanwhile, Henry Redwood, Jonathan's father, slumped against a wall, aged a decade overnight by the grim reality of potentially losing his only son. A hush fell over them when the attending physician emerged to announce that Jonathan was in critical condition, and they would do everything possible to stabilize him. The next 48 hours, he stressed, were crucial. Back at Redwood Mansion, staff members exchanged worried glances. Linda Rowe and Patricia Hawthorne, whose initial tip had contributed to the catastrophic confrontation, felt devastating guilt. Could they have handled the situation differently? Might Jonathan have found out in a gentler way, one that didn't lead him to that tragic moment on a rain-soaked highway? From Switzerland, Redwood Innovations' global partners tried to reach out, offering prayers, well wishes, and attempts to ensure business continuity if the worst should happen. But none of it mattered now to the Redwood family. Their entire focus had narrowed to a single hospital bed, where Jonathan Redwood's life hung by a thread. Over the next 48 hours, the Redwood family and Clara set up vigil in the ICU waiting room. Machines beeped and hissed in the background, each noise either fueling their hope or stoking their dread. Sleep was impossible. Worry replaced every other emotion. Clara's pregnancy was at a critical juncture, just weeks away from her due date, and the stress took a toll on her body. Early on the second day, Clara felt a series of sharp pains in her abdomen. Fear gripped her, and she realized these were not mere Braxton Hicks contractions, but something more urgent. Caroline, seeing Clara turn pale, insisted she see a doctor immediately. Within minutes, hospital staff whisked Clara to the maternity ward for observation. The irony was cruel. On one floor, Jonathan Redwood fought for his life. On another floor, the next generation of Redwood might be on its way, far too early and under the worst possible circumstances. Michael lingered in the hospital halls, torn between a sense of responsibility and the knowledge that his presence only magnified the Redwood family's anguish. At one point, he attempted to approach Henry Redwood, hoping to apologize or at least express his concern. Henry's face contorted with a powerful mix of sorrow and rage. He muttered that Michael was the cause of his son's torment and ordered him never to come near the family again. Michael retreated, swallowed by guilt and powerless to make things right. In the maternity ward, Clara was told she was showing signs of early labor, likely triggered by extreme stress. Doctors administered medications to delay contractions, but they warned her that the baby might arrive sooner than expected. Clara, half delirious, clung to the desperate hope that Jonathan would wake up and they could be together when their child arrived. She whispered silent prayers, promising that if Jonathan survived, she would dedicate every moment to repairing their fractured marriage. As the hours dragged on, a sliver of hope emerged. Jonathan stabilized slightly. The internal bleeding slowed, and surgeons managed to set multiple fractures in his arms and legs. However, he remained unconscious, his condition precarious. The Redwood family drew on this small sign of progress, believing if Jonathan had held on this long, perhaps he was meant to survive. 3 days after the accident, Jonathan Redwood opened his eyes. It happened in the early morning hours, just as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds. A nurse had been checking his vitals when she noticed the flicker of movement in his eyelids. She called for a doctor, and within moments, a group of medical professionals surrounded the bed, shining lights into his pupils, calling his name, asking if he could hear them. Jonathan was disoriented, his body riddled with pain, his mouth parched. He tried to speak but managed only a raspy croak. A swirl of images flooded his mind: the accident, Clara's tears, Michael's betrayal before everything blurred again. Yet he was alive, and that alone felt like a miracle. Caroline burst into tears upon hearing the news. Henry Redwood placed a trembling hand over his chest, relief and gratitude washing over him. Clara, still confined to the maternity ward, could barely contain her sobs when a nurse brought her the update. She immediately requested a wheelchair so she could see her husband, insisting that nothing else in the world mattered more at that moment. When Clara was wheeled into Jonathan's ICU room, he was half awake, surrounded by machines that monitored every heartbeat. Metal pins and casts indicated the extent of his injuries. He turned his head slowly, and their eyes met. In that charged silence, an entire epic of betrayal, regret, fear, and love passed between them. She tried to speak, but tears overwhelmed her. Jonathan, sedated by painkillers, managed to ask in a trembling voice, "Is the baby all right?" Clara nodded, tears streaming, and reached for his hand. Hesitantly, Jonathan allowed her to hold it, though his anger and sense of betrayal lingered. Seeing Clara in that wheelchair, pregnant with what he still hoped was his child, softened the edges of his rage. Their moment was cut short by the medical staff's need to run tests. Clara reluctantly let go of Jonathan's hand, promising to return as soon as she could. Jonathan watched her leave, uncertain what the future held, but certain that the love he once felt had not been entirely extinguished. The Redwood family decided to manage Jonathan's delicate condition by limiting visitors. Despite this, Michael Davis felt compelled to see Jonathan and offer an apology or explanation, anything to alleviate the guilt that weighed heavily on him. He knew this might be unwelcome, but something inside him insisted he try. He arrived at the hospital, armed with a bouquet of white lilies. Caroline Redwood intercepted him in the hallway. Her eyes, usually kind, blazed with protective fury. "How dare you come here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so as not to cause a public scene. Haven't you done enough damage? Michael lowered his gaze. I just want to say I'm sorry for everything. I never intended, but Caroline cut him off. You never intended to ruin my son's life? Spare me your excuses. You're no longer part of Redwood Innovations, and you're not welcome here, he pleaded. Please, I need to see him, even if just for a minute. Caroline remained resolute. If you truly cared about Jonathan, you'd respect his need to heal. Now leave before I have security remove you. Crushed, Michael turned and walked away, the bouquet still clutched in his trembling hands. He left it on a chair in the hallway, tears burning his eyes. In that moment, the gravity of what he had done felt suffocating. He had lost his mentor, a man he respected. He had lost a woman he cared for deeply, and he was likely about to lose the career he had worked so hard to build. Meanwhile, in Jonathan's hospital room, doctors performed another round of scans. His recovery was tentative, but progressing. After they finished, Clara, still in her wheelchair, returned. Gathering her courage, she approached his bedside. Jonathan fixed his eyes on her, trying to reconcile the love he once knew with the betrayal that haunted him. Clara took a shaky breath. Jonathan, so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. It was a moment of weakness. It only happened once, she lied initially, but then corrected herself, tears streaming. Maybe twice. I got lonely, I felt abandoned, but that's not an excuse. He remained silent, every muscle in his jaw tightened. She continued, I know you might never forgive me, but I need you to know that this child is yours. I would do anything to prove it. Jonathan closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to lash out, to throw her from the room. Another part, weakened by injury and heartbreak, simply felt exhaustion. After a long pause, he said, We'll do a paternity test. When the child is born, Clara nodded, tears silently falling. In that moment, a fragile shard of hope glimmered in the gloom. Within a week, Jonathan was stable enough to be moved out of the ICU. Though he had a long road to recovery, with multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy ahead, he was coherent and able to speak. Clara, meanwhile, struggled to keep her emotions in check as her early contractions had been halted, but she was placed on strict bed rest in a private room just a few doors down from Jonathan's. Caroline and Henry Redwood devised a plan to protect their family's reputation and future. First and foremost, Redwood Innovations would remain under the temporary leadership of the senior executive team until Jonathan could reassume his duties. Second, all scandalous rumors were to be squashed swiftly by a crisis management firm. The Redwood name would not be dragged through the mud. Third, they would work toward finding a resolution for Jonathan and Clara's relationship, whether that ended in reconciliation or an amicable separation after the child's birth. Whatever happened, the Redwood family intended to handle it quietly and with dignity. In the hush of a late evening, Jonathan, his body weary from healing, called Clara to his room. Nurses helped her settle in a chair by his bedside. He swallowed hard, gathering courage for what he was about to say. I can't ignore what happened, he said quietly. Every time I close my eyes, I see you with him. Clara's tears started anew. I know. I'm so sorry. And if there's any way to move forward, he silenced her with a slight raise of his hand. I'm not ready to talk about forgiveness yet, but I do know that my child, didn't ask for any of this. I want to be part of its life. We'll figure out the rest. Maybe counseling, or maybe. He left the sentence unfinished, the possibility of divorce hanging heavy in the air. Despite the uncertainty, Clara felt an immense sense of relief. At least Jonathan was willing to consider a path forward, no matter how fraught. She nodded, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes. As the days in the hospital turned into weeks, Jonathan underwent multiple surgeries on his fractured legs and ribs. Physical therapy sessions began to restore limited mobility, but each session left him drained. In her own room, Clara struggled to calm her stress levels to avoid another round of premature contractions. Caroline Redwood, despite her misgivings, tried to be supportive, ensuring Clara had the best prenatal care possible. Life outside the hospital moved on, but for Jonathan and Clara, time slowed to a crawl. One day blurred into the next, measured only by medical routines and the slow building of emotional stamina needed to confront the heartbreak that had landed them here. Barely a month after the accident, Clara went into labor. Though still early, the baby seemed determined to make an entrance. Doctors rushed to prepare for a possible premature birth. Jonathan, wheelchair-bound after surgeries, insisted on being present in the delivery room. It was a tense and emotionally charged scene. Machines beeped steadily, measuring Clara's contractions and the baby's heartbeat. Nurses moved with swift precision, guiding Clara through breath exercises. Jonathan sat nearby, his heart hammering. He remembered how, months earlier, he had daydreamed about this moment, the joyous event that would expand their family. Instead, everything was overshadowed by betrayal and tragedy. Yet in the crucial final pushes, nothing else mattered but the life entering the world. Clara screamed, tears of pain and anticipation blurring her vision. Jonathan clasped her hand, offering words of encouragement, even as his own body ached from recent surgeries. At last, the baby's cries filled the room. A boy, small but feisty. He had a thick tuft of dark hair that mirrored Jonathan's own. Tears of relief and awe mingled on both parents' faces. The baby, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, was handed to Clara. Jonathan reached out, gently touching the child's tiny fingers. In that fleeting instant, father, mother, and child formed a new bond that transcended the chaos of the preceding months. When the baby was deemed stable enough, Jonathan insisted on a paternity test. Though the newborn was premature, modern testing methods could still provide a reliable result. Clara understood she wanted no lingering doubts. Samples were taken, and everyone braced for the outcome. During the wait, Jonathan tried to stifle the uneasy fear that haunted him. If the child was not his, he had no idea how he would cope. 3 agonizing days later, the results came back. Jonathan was indeed the father. The rush of relief he felt was staggering, culminating in an outpouring of tears he could no longer hold back. Caroline and Henry Redwood breathed a collective sigh of gratitude, and even the staff at Redwood Mansion, who heard the news, felt a weight lift off their shoulders. However, paternity alone did not solve the emotional rift between Jonathan and Clara. He still felt betrayed, unsure if he could ever fully trust her again. Clara, profoundly remorseful, recognized that no magic solution could erase what she had done. They decided, for now, to focus on the newborn's health, naming him Ryan Redwood. Time would tell if their marriage could survive this upheaval. Ryan Redwood spent his first days in a neonatal unit, receiving specialized care due to his premature birth. Clara and Jonathan took turns at his bedside, marveling at his fragile perfection. In those quiet hours, they discussed the possibilities for their future. Jonathan wanted to keep Redwood Innovations thriving, but the near-death experience had changed his perspective. He no longer wished to dedicate every waking moment to empire building. He wanted to be present for Ryan, if only to ensure that the child would never feel as emotionally starved as he sometimes had in his father's shadow. Clara, for her part, vowed to do whatever it took to rebuild trust. She offered to sign any legal agreements Jonathan wanted, including a post-nuptial contract. She agreed to therapy, both joint and individual. She even proposed a fresh start outside New York, somewhere less obsessed with high society and paparazzi, somewhere they could reconnect as a family. Jonathan listened, but remained non-committal. The spectre of her betrayal was still too vivid. When Ryan was finally released from the neonatal unit, Jonathan arranged for a specialized infant care team at Redwood Mansion. Against all odds, baby Ryan thrived. Jonathan held him often, gazing into his tiny face with an awe that softened his wounded heart. On more than one occasion, he caught Clara watching them, tears in her eyes. Their gazes would meet, a silent acknowledgement of shared love for this fragile life they'd brought into the world. And so began a tentative dance of reconciliation. Clara had ended all contact with Michael Davis, who had resigned from Redwood Innovations to avoid further damage to the company or the Redwood family. Jonathan never spoke to Michael again, choosing to bury that chapter under the weight of more pressing concerns. Yet the ghost of Michael's betrayal lingered in the corners of Jonathan's mind. Would he forever question Clara's fidelity? At Caroline's suggestion, the couple started therapy sessions with Dr. Iris Caldwell, a renowned psychologist who specialized in relationship trauma. Slowly, they unpacked the complicated dynamics that had led Clara to seek emotional solace elsewhere, and Jonathan to distance himself from the marriage. There were tears, shouts, and painful confessions. At times, Jonathan stormed out of sessions, claiming the breach of trust was insurmountable. But each time, he returned. Whether out of love for Clara or a sense of responsibility for Ryan, something kept pulling him back, urging him to try. Months passed. Jonathan continued physical therapy, eventually trading his wheelchair for crutches, then walking with a cane. The Redwood Innovations Board was relieved to see him gradually return to helm the company, albeit with a less punishing schedule. He insisted on a family-first approach, setting an example for his executives that work success was not everything. Clara spent her days tending to Ryan's needs, balancing that with philanthropic efforts she had put on hold. She organized fundraisers and community outreach programs, but ensured she never missed Ryan's doctor appointments or bonding time. She wanted to prove to Jonathan, and maybe even more so to herself, that she could be trusted, that she was committed to their marriage. They occasionally ventured out together, presenting a united front at public events. Paparazzi lenses hungrily captured images of the Redwood couple, speculating on whether they had weathered the storm or were simply faking it. Neither Jonathan nor Clara confirmed or denied. They allowed the world to gossip, focusing their energy on healing. Ryan became the living testament to their bond, a bond that might still have a chance at redemption. Occasionally, Jonathan's nightmares returned, horrifying flashbacks of the crash, jumbled images of Clara and Michael entwined. On those nights, he would wake in a cold sweat, only to find Clara by his side, stroking his hair gently, offering soft words of reassurance. Bit by bit, the anger and pain receded, leaving behind the possibility of a more honest, though scarred, relationship. A year after the accident, Redwood Mansion was transformed for Ryan's first birthday celebration. Gone were the extravagant gala touches of their past events. This was a small, intimate gathering. Close friends, some business associates, an extended family gathered to celebrate Ryan's milestone and, perhaps subconsciously, Jonathan and Clara's perseverance. Kevin Walters was there, offering his steady legal counsel and also genuine friendship. Patricia Hawthorne and Linda Rowe, the staff members who had first raised the alarm about the affair, hovered at the edges, thankful they had not been dismissed. At one point, Jonathan stood up, leaning lightly on his cane, and addressed the small crowd. He spoke about the preciousness of family, about nearly losing everything, and about the second chance he had been given. His voice trembled, but not from weakness. It trembled with the sheer weight of gratitude he felt for being alive to see his son's first birthday. Clara's heart swelled. She stepped forward, took his hand, and together they blew out the candle on Ryan's small birthday cake. Ryan babbled gleefully, reaching for his father and mother with sticky hands. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the mansion lay still, Jonathan and Clara stood by the window in their bedroom. The moon bathed the gardens in a soft glow. Clara rested her head on Jonathan's shoulder, and he gently wrapped an arm around her waist. Neither said anything for a long time, letting the moment speak for itself. At last, Jonathan whispered, "I'm ready to move forward. It'll take time, but I don't want to lose what we have." Clara closed her eyes, a single tear of relief sliding down her cheek. She placed her hand over his, which rested on her stomach. Me neither. The future remained uncertain, riddled with the scars of betrayal and the memories of that tragic accident. But in that tender, moonlit moment, they chose hope. They chose to believe that love, battered and bruised though it was, could be rebuilt. And for the first time in a long time, that dream felt real. Change can be a brutal teacher, yet through heartbreak and suffering, Jonathan and Clara Redwood found new depths to love and loyalty they had once taken for granted. Amid the wreckage of betrayal, a tragic accident, and the premature birth of baby Ryan, they stood at a crossroads, let their story end in bitterness or rise to an uncertain but hopeful tomorrow. By sharing their emotional scars and shouldering each other's pain, they chose the latter. Their journey reminds us that mistakes can be forgiven, if not forgotten, and that hope can thrive even in life's darkest corridors. If you found yourself moved by their tumultuous path to redemption, please consider hitting the like button, sharing this video with friends who love drama-filled stories, and subscribing for more gripping narratives. Let's keep exploring the resilience of the human heart together.